Okay, so I think we're ready to actually make the first video for this channel, which is basically on government and governing systems. The first video I made for this channel was an introduction to um, the channel, and made basically for setup and to try to figure out what I was doing and what I wanted to do. But it did serve a purpose because what I wanted to do also was to try to show that the Constitution really doesn't need interpreting. Um, and when I read from Article 2, Section 1, and from the 12th Amendment about the electoral process for how do we choose our president, I basically did just that. I read exactly from Article 2, Section 1, every piece, and there's nothing to interpret. If you want to interpret it, you should be saying why, because what you're doing is you're trying to um, game the system. You're trying to gain some kind of an advantage, either to execute your agenda or get a person that you want elected, or get some kind of control over the system that you shouldn't have. And so you go through all this um, scheming in order to interpret the Constitution so that you can do what you want to do. And basically that's what's been done with the Constitution for pretty much 200 years now, is that people have tried to get things to work the way that they wanted to work so that they could get the advantage that they wanted. And that it started kind of with Jefferson when he lost that first election with that he was involved in the third election. He lost to Adams by the votes of three electors, and that didn't sit well with him because he didn't want to be vice president. He wanted to be president, because the president is basically a statesman. He's the point of contact for all foreign countries who have any kind of dealings or negotiations with us, with the United States. And the vice president is a legislator. He's the chief legislator. And if you read Adams' inaugural address as the first vice president, he does refer to this difference between being a person who is actually working on the legislative process, as being a part of it, to actually being a person who makes it possible for the electoral process to work the legislative process to work properly. So when Jefferson first tried to game the system, he some kind of way got control over how the electors would vote, and he got them all to vote for him and Burr on their two ballots. And in that way, he was trying to take votes away from Adams to stop Adams from becoming president, being reelected president. And they ended up in a tie. Well, that's how you know that Jefferson gamed the system, and there was some corruption because it's impossible for them to have tied unless every elector that wrote Jefferson's name on one of their ballots wrote Burr on their other ballot. And so, who was the person who was supposed to actually expose that type of corruption and skullduggery? Well, it was Jefferson himself, because he was the he was the president of the Senate, and that's the person who's supposed to have presided over the opening and counting of the electors' votes. And so he would have had to basically expose himself. So in that regard, he probably should have recused himself from that job, or the states should have ordered that he be recused from that job because of his association with that as the president of the Senate, so that somebody impartial could have been there and basically exposed that skullduggery. But getting back to the Constitution is very explicit, and it should be taken literally, and there's really no reason to interpret the Constitution. It tells you exactly what needs to be done, how it should be done, when it should be done, in order to assemble the government the way it's supposed to be assembled. And so it'll function the way it's supposed to function. And that leads us to what the topic of this channel is that this is government and governing systems. And so you have to understand the questions that you have to ask when you look at the founding documents is who wrote the document, why did they write it, and who they write it for. And if you do those three things, what you will understand is that the states, as the Union, wrote all three of the documents. They wrote all three of the documents for themselves as the Union. And each document served a purpose. The Declaration of Independence served the purpose of forming the Confederacy. And that's exactly what they were. They joined together in a common cause against a common enemy. They were already involved in the Revolutionary War, and they came together to fight together and protect each other's interest, and so they formed a union, and that union is a confederacy. How do you know that? Well, in Article 1 of the Articles of Confederation, it says the style of this confederacy shall be the United States of America. So they basically named their confederacy, the Union, the United States of America. The United States of America, you have to understand the literal meaning of the word united. They were united in a common cause against a common enemy. That's where the united part comes from, in the United States. And who was united? Well, the states were. And so they formed a confederacy to work together to defend themselves and to protect the independence that they had declared. But at that point, they didn't have a government, no government, and so they didn't have any structure or anything like that to how do they make decisions as the Union, how do they work together as states, and then how do they pay for it. If you join any club or even a health club, what do you want to know? You want to know what your privileges are, your benefits are, how much it's going to cost to be part of what's your rights of participation. And basically that's exactly what they put down on paper in the Articles of Confederation. They showed how each state, how the states would work together, and they did it in a General Assembly. Now they've been doing this General Assembly since before the states declared their independence. They gathered. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, in the last paragraph, it says, "We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled." That's what they did. They assembled in a Congress to discuss what they wanted to do. Now, when they did it for the Declaration of Independence, their signing on to the Declaration of Independence was their ratification and their joining the Union. And so they formed this Union. Now they needed to give some structure to how to make decisions as a union, for all questions that could face the union, war, peace. So basically, in the Declaration of Independence, at the end of that same paragraph, this is the last paragraph, it states what they were expecting when they declared their independence. And it says here that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. So this is why they declared their independence, so that they could do all the things that free and independent states of right may do. So for a lot of people, they have this idea that since the Declaration of Independence begins and talks about all these things about the free rights of people, individual rights, that all men are created equal, and that life, liberty, and the pursuit of, all those things that are at the beginning of the Declaration of Independence. But that this whole all those things are go into the reasons, the justification that they were building up, which is most of the Declaration of Independence, to why they would file for independence and declare their independence from them. But that last paragraph tells you why they declared their independence, because they should do all the things which independent states may of right do. That's why they did it. So when you go from there, they filed their independence, but they didn't have any government. They were a confederacy, but they didn't have any government. So they had sworn to work together. They made a pact with each other to work together against Great Britain for their independence and to fight together and all that kind of stuff. But they really didn't have any government. They didn't have any structure. So that's when they started working on the Articles of Confederation right after they declared their independence. And I think they started maybe 2 or 3 months after they had drafted the Declaration of Independence. They started working on the Articles of Confederation in order to give that structure to and form the federal government, to form the government that would basically rule the how the states would work together. And that's why Articles of Confederation is the single most important founding document we have. It's the Articles of Confederation. And it's very explicit. And I won't cover the Articles of Confederation here. I want to cover it alone because it's that important. You have to understand everything they did in the Articles of Confederation, and it's a document that is not alterable. And if they wanted to alter it, they had to go through a certain protocol, which is also here. They had to have a certain number of states to get together in order to alter anything in the Articles of Confederation. And that's how the Constitution was actually written. It wasn't that some founding fathers got together in secret and decided that they wanted to write the Constitution because the Articles of Confederation weren't working out the way that they wanted it to, which is what we're taught in school and basically what everybody believes. No, that's not what happened one bit. They actually had to have a certain number of states, 9, in attendance in order to draft the Constitution. And then once the Constitution was drafted, they had to have a certain number of states. Well, based on the Articles of Confederation, every state needed 100% ratification of the Constitution, and that's why some states, because of the way they wrote the Constitution, they only needed 9 states in order to put the Constitution in force. But that's why New York, since they hadn't ratified it, couldn't vote in the first election for president. It's because they hadn't ratified it yet. And in order to participate by the Articles of Confederation, they too had to ratify the Constitution, which they did before Washington took office, but after the election. So everything in the Articles of Confederation is still in force today. The only changes between the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution was this idea of balance. And the problem was under the Articles of Confederation is that they had a problem with addressing the disparity between the states with their population and wealth. So you had some big states, some small states, and some wealthy states, some poor states. And so they had a real problem with that, making decisions based on that because it's unbalanced, because the smaller states could still overwhelm the larger states, even though it took 2/3, and force the larger states into spending money that they didn't want to spend or doing things that they didn't want to do. And they didn't have any way of addressing that. And also the way that they taxed, the taxes were based on the assessment of value of property, and then they did an apportionment of the taxes based on the value of property, which is all forms of property. So even in the southern states, if they had slaves as and they considered them to be property, then those slaves they'd have to pay taxes for those because of their state would get that portion of taxes because of that value of their property. So they had to address those two things. They had to and they addressed those two things through going to Republican government and to a per capita apportionment of representation and direct taxes. and that's how they were able to normalize the states based on a common factor, the population, and come out with a more fair and equitable distribution of representation and taxes. And that's what the whole part of the Constitution, the whole Constitution is all about, is doing that fair and equitable distribution. So this is where you're going. And when you look at the Constitution, the title of the Constitution tells you exactly that. The title of the Constitution is the Constitution of the United States. Constitution means assembly. So this is the Assembly of the United States. Where do the states assemble? Well, they assemble in a Congress. And in Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution, it says all legislative powers are vested in a Congress. Okay? So they haven't changed anything from the Declaration of Independence through the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution. The states are still assembling. They have an assembly, a general assembly, just like you would at school. They called you into assembly. They come in there and they discuss everything. That's exactly what Congress is. Congress is an assembly of the states, a meeting of the states. So they can come and they can raise whatever questions they need to raise and figure out how they're going to resolve those questions. So that basically makes Congress the federal government, because the Constitution, the word to constitute means to form or assemble, is the assembly of Congress. What form does the assembly take? How it's assembled? What's the distribution of suffrage in order for those states to vote to come to a majority consensus, and what constitutes a majority consensus? So that's what the Constitution is all about. And you have further understanding of that because the Constitution's the first thing in the preamble says, "We the people of the United States." It doesn't say "we the people" only. No, "we the people of the United States" means the United States and Congress assembled. The Union wrote the Constitution. Why'd they write it? To, what does it say? It says, in order to form a more perfect union. And what's the union? It's the United States and Congress assembled. So they what they were saying is they improved Congress. That's what the Constitution does over the Articles of Confederation. How'd they improve Congress? Well, they added a Republican form of government so that they could do this normalization, per capita normalization, in order to join the states and have a more balanced system for making decisions and answering questions that they have as the Union. So, and that's right there at the beginning of the Constitution. That's how you know what the Constitution is for. So when you say unconstitutional, what it means is you didn't assemble Congress correctly. You haven't assembled, your assembly is not, you have a problem with assembly. Laws can't be unconstitutional. Why? Because as long as the law is written in an assembly that was formed by the Constitution, then the laws cannot be unconstitutional. Your assembly of your lawmaking or decision making body is unconstitutional, not the laws that they make. Now, can those laws disenfranchise or cause a grievance with the state because it disproportionately affects them? Yes, and that's what the Supreme Court is for, so that they have a place to air their grievances. But laws are not unconstitutional. So this is what we're going to get into in the next couple of things. We're going to start with the Articles of Confederation. Then we're going to go to the Constitution to show what changes were made and how those changes were made. And then we'll talk about the legislative processes that are how it changed in another video from the Articles of Confederation to the to the Constitution, because there are actually two legislative processes. One is based on the Republican form of government. The other is based on just the federal, just like the Articles of Confederation. It's a straight federal equal states a legislative process. So that's where we're going to go in the future, and hopefully going through this we can understand governing systems and why it's not a democracy, and how voting works in the republic and all that other, what's the involvement of the people and all that other kind of stuff. But that's where we're going in the future, and I think that we should be able to understand what's wrong with our current government by actually looking at the Constitution and the Articles of Confederation to understand the governing system the way it's supposed to be. All right, that's enough for one day.